Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Furloughs, students, and politics. Our guest tonight is Senator Will Espero. Thank you for coming to the show. And Associate Professor Jonathan Okamura from University of Hawai'i, Ethnic Studies, and Professor Noel also from Ethnic Studies. You all have been not only following what's happening in terms of the furloughs, etc., but also Senator Espero, you have been very active in the Senate and in the community about those particular issues. But before we talk about all these matters, I would like to go to Representative Takumi's interview I had with him, and it's a segment of about 4 minutes. We'll take that and then we can comment on it, and we'll see what your opinion of it and your opinion about the things, and we'll have that particular discussion. So we go to Representative Takumi's segment.
In my opinion, what government should spend its money on is its core function. That includes education, from preschool all the way to the university, social services, that safety net that we need, and of course public safety. Those are the 3 core functions. Everything else, I think we really have to take a look at and scrutinize. But don't get me wrong, we've got to look at everything and decide what programs are critical to fulfilling these core functions. Because look, not every government service or program is equally important and equally necessary. I think they all provide services to our community, but in times like this, I think we really have to take a long and hard look of what's absolutely critical. Regarding the furloughs, many people have emailed and called our offices saying, why didn't you guys do something about the furloughs? I think the community has to realize there is a collective bargaining process that the legislature or individual legislators do not participate. I frankly think that's a good thing. It's between the office of the governor and the bargaining unit. In this case, it was the teachers union, the HSTA, and the Board of Education and the Department of Education. Those 4 entities were the ones that signed the contract, and they decided it would be 17 furlough days, and it meant 17 classroom days. Now, as you know, the teacher's contract has 6 non-instructional days. They're called waiver days and whatnot, where the children are not in school. But these 17 days came from the classroom days. So once that decision was made, and I found out about it like everyone else when I read the paper, and I was surprised. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, it was a failure on the part of the adults. And I don't want to point fingers at just those who signed the contract. I point a finger at myself as well, because we at the legislature, although we didn't want to intervene in that collective bargaining process, we still can do something about it. So we know the problem. We know the problem that here our children are out for 17 classroom days, roughly 10% of their entire school year. It's the highest number in the country by far. Other states with worse budget deficits have dealt with their deficits in a different way than we have. So what do we do from now? I think the ball is squarely in the governor's court, because again, we cannot, even if we were to do something, pass a tax increase, support using the Hurricane Relief Fund or means like that, unless that contract is reopened. As you well know, here is the collective bargaining agreement ratified by the teachers. That has to be reopened. Otherwise, it still says 17 classroom days. So we need an agreement from all the parties, the governor, the Board of Education, the Department of Education, and the teachers union. They're willing to reopen the contract. At that time, I think then we as a community, parents and business community, legislators, other unions, whatever, all these partners, students and whatnot, can then join in a community dialogue and say, how do we resolve this? Here's the goal, to reduce the number of furlough days. I don't think we're going to get that down to 0. But what is that number that would have the least impact on the students and their achievement potential? Then, how do we get there? If the goal is to reduce the furlough days by 8, 10, whatever that number is, how do we get there? As you know, there's been a call to have a special session at the legislature to deal with this, but many legislators, including myself, had some concerns about that, because you don't go into a special session until you know why you're going into special session. And if you talk to colleagues in the building here at the Capitol, everybody has a different idea. You have to have one idea because you have to put that idea into a bill. The bill has to be a clean bill, meaning it has to pass very quickly because a special session is only 3 days and goes up to the governor, and then we can resolve the situation.
Well, we have heard what Representative Roy Takumi has said. From your vantage point in the Senate and in the community, how would you react to what he said and your opinion about the furloughs?
Well, I believe that he did emphasize how education is one of the core. And this is important because this debate is how will we in government allow education to be the best it can be. And if we feel that way, why are we allowing 17 days to be lost in the school year? There are ways that we can have a special session, but it is imperative that, as he said, all of the stakeholders must agree. And it's up to us at this time to step up to the plate, show some leadership, and pass a bill that will make the school year whole. The window of opportunity gets smaller each week. I certainly believe we need to do this before mid-December, or else the 17 days may become a reality and will be the worst in the nation and probably the worst in the industrial world in terms of classroom instruction days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as regard that the ball is in the governor's court, how would you see that?
It's not completely in her court, although from yesterday's Senate hearing, we did conclude that there are funds that if the governor were to release them to education and for the furloughs, we can certainly reduce the 17 figure.
Mm-hmm.
And those are from the federal stimulus Part B funds. There's $35 million that has been in question.
Mm-hmm.
However, we believe $10 million will be for UH with $25 million for DOE. If the governor were to use those funds, that would certainly help the situation. But lacking that, the legislature can take action if we so desire. And as Rep. Takumi mentioned, the issue is coming up with a bill that we can all agree upon. Mm-hmm. And I've been working with some of my colleagues on that for the last 2 weeks. And I believe we're getting closer. There are several options out there. If you look at Hurricane Relief Fund, you can look at the Rainy Day Fund, you can look at the special federal stimulus monies, or a combination thereof.
Mm-hmm.
So we in the legislature, I believe, should step up to the plate, present a plan, get the stakeholders behind it. We've received many comments, emails, faxes from parents and other children advocates who are supporting the idea of stopping the 17 furlough days. Mm-hmm. And collectively, if we work together, collaboratively, I believe we can do it. But this is really the time for leadership in the legislature, leadership from the governor and the BOE and the unions to all say, yes, we have one goal and we want to complete that goal within the next 2 or 3 weeks. If we have the political will and the desire, it can be done.
Okay, great. We'll come back to more details about those particular things. But John, so from your vantage point as an educator and someone who's been interested in those matters, how do you see it?
Well, I give Senator Espero a lot of credit for taking the lead on this issue. He's the vice chair of this committee, and he had the hearing at the Capitol last week when Brian Taniguchi, the chair, was away. But he's continuing to push the issue, even though the House last week had come to this understanding that they don't have the votes to call for a special session. So I wanted to ask you, because every time when you came to my class, for example, and spoke about this issue or at the hearing, I learned more about the political realities of coming to a solution to the Friday furloughs, because from our vantage point, we're just kind of talking about what should be done, and I don't think the three of us, as we talked about this issue, necessarily have a full understanding of the politics of it. So why is the House more resistant to the idea of a special session than the Senate, where you obtain a majority of signatures under your petition to call for a special session?
I believe last week Speaker Say said he'd consider a special session if there was a plan that everyone could agree upon. And that's the key. With the 6 stakeholders involved, everyone would have to have a consensus and say this is the approach, because we couldn't have anyone waffling, or else the whole plan would collapse. I know leadership is looking at this from a statewide level as well. As you may know, the budget deficit for next session may be $1 billion plus. Last session it was in excess of $2 billion, and we had a very trying and difficult time in terms of how we were going to reduce the budget. This year, the tax revenues, according to the Department of Taxation, are coming in low. Visitors are low, spending is low, and the tax revenues are low. And if it continues through next year, then that $1 billion deficit will likely be a reality. And the leadership may be looking at it from, instead of tapping some of these funds now, let's wait till next session and look at the total picture. But some of my colleagues and I feel that we're in a crisis now in education. To be down to 100, and what we found out, it's 161 days. We'd be not 163, but 161. Now, that's embarrassing. That's telling our children that we're willing to balance our budget on your future. And for me and many others, that's just unacceptable. We believe that we can stop the situation temporarily from January to June, for example, at least. So it's possible we might have 6 or 7 furlough days, but from January to June, we could make it whole. And then by next session, we deal with the total picture, whatever that might be, whether it's more cuts, other revenue generating ideas, a combination. But I believe some of us are just saying education should be placed on the pedestal, and we must do everything within our power to deal with the situation before the end of the year, or else, as I said, the reality is that we are labeled the lowest in the nation.
Yeah, in fact, the New York Times article sometime last week, could you comment on that?
Well, my sister called me about it to alert me to it, and she was saying, "What's going on in Hawaii?" Because she was saying, okay, and then we looked at the article, and it's pretty damning. It really paints Hawaii as a place with a failed educational system, and one with a very grim future. What you were saying about that we're basically balancing our books on our children's future. It's also our future, because basically they're the ones who have to innovate, they're the ones who have to create, they're the ones who have to meet the challenges of this new economy that we're dealing with. This, and if they can't do it, then our future as middle-aged and older people is really in jeopardy also. So we're jeopardizing everybody's future in Hawaii at this point.
Just to put it more generally, would that be good for tourism? I mean, you know what I'm saying? The first industry, I mean, the largest industry in Hawaii. I mean, when you have like this reputation nationally, at least, as the worst education system, or one of the worst, at least in terms of days, being taught, then how would that be for the rest of, reputation of Hawaii, whether it's tourism or something else,
But what this downturn, Ibrahim, tells us is that tourism is much too much of a volatile, vulnerable industry for us to put all our eggs in it, which we've done. That basically what we need at this point is real economic diversification, and only a really educated, intelligent, alert, innovative group of young people can have the position to make that kind of diversification.
Or at least have a prayer in doing so. Yeah, right. Any more comments around this?
Well, to go back to the idea of what Roy was saying about, well, we need to have a plan when we go in for a special session, which might be only 3 days. But the way I see what you've been doing, you've been working on a plan. As I understand it, you're drafting a bill when you have these meetings so that they can have an idea what this bill will look like. But to me, I can't understand why they're just saying we need a plan, and they're unwilling to participate in these discussions. My view is it's only the senators who are participating actively in trying to come up with a solution.
Well,
am I wrong? Or are there representatives also been actively involved?
This whole process began with petitions on October 30th. October 30th was the first Friday furlough. And as you may recall, there was the rally at the state capitol that maybe drew between 500 and 1,000 parents and children. At that time, I started circulating a petition at the state senate, which to date has received 15 signatures, which is a simple majority. To call a special session, we would need to have a 2/3 majority if we wanted to do it on our own without the governor's agreement. As of today, though, I hear that the House is up to maybe 22 or 23. So there are many people who signed the petition, and I know many representatives who are supportive of a special session, but they just don't want to sign it because there is no definitive plan. And so we're working very hard on that definitive plan. I've seen 2 or 3 bills, drafts, and it's conceivable there could be another 1 or 2 out there. But eventually, and I'd say within the next week to 10 days, we'd have to really narrow it down to 1 or 2 options and possibilities. And I've also been in touch with the teachers union and BOE and DOE, and everyone agrees that we want to end these days. So it's not lack of desire. So we now need to just use our leadership skills, our compromise skills, all the skills that we have learned in the last decades or so to come up with a bill that will save our public schools. And leadership is key in this as well, because some people don't want to act contrary to what leadership may be saying. However, some of us are saying this has nothing to do with leadership or any individual's decision. This is all about our kids, their public education, their future, and as you said, the future of our state. And this is something that many of us feel we must do. And we don't want to blame anybody if it doesn't happen, but since there is a window open, we need to do everything till the very, very end to see if we can get something through that window.
Is this one case where popular upsurge has been this popular outrage by parents and others has really sort of lit a fire under the...
It has certainly helped the situation, yes. And I ask residents and those watching to call your senators and representatives and the governor if you feel the same as we do, that you want to put an end to these furlough days and you want to keep our children in the public schools on Fridays.
Yeah, any more discussion about these points that we're having?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, go back to what Will said. I think the representatives seem to be taking their direction from Calvin Say as the speaker. And insofar as he's not come out in favor of a special session, and he seems to have been opposed to the whole idea of trying to resolve this issue at this time and leaving it till the next session. So I think this probably accounts for the hesitancy of other representatives to step forward, publicly state what their position is, and align themselves with these others who would like to see a resolution to this problem.
Yeah, and well, the other thing is that, you know, in terms of a particular plan, if you don't have a plan, you know, you cannot, as you even mentioned that, but at the same time, why not work for a plan?
Why not join the discussion?
So, however, I'm not sure if the House, at least members of the House, are not working for a plan. Or are they? You see, so that's a particular question. So what I want to do is go to another segment with Representative Roy Takumi. He's talking about the stimulus dollars and so forth, and then talking also about what the what the long-term strategies also. He talks about, not in this segment, but he mentioned that as well. And elsewhere, we will talk about that later on. But we'll go to Representative Takumi's discussion about the stimulus dollars.
The stimulus dollars is a very broad package, as you well know. It was for infrastructure, you know, roads, bridges, and those sorts of things. It was also for human services. Let's just talk about the education stimulus dollars. Right. There were two pots of money. One was called Part A, one was called Part B. The Part A dollars was essentially split up between the University of Hawai'i and the Department of Education. The university took 30% of the initial allocation and the DOE took 70%. And it is true, some of that was used to what's known as backfill the shortfall that they had in the department. To be fair to the government, that is permitted by the federal government to do that. Yes, so because the feds have been very fastidious, they've been very diligent about scrutinizing states that use it in ways it's not intended to do. Right? I only wish they did that to some contractors in Iraq, but that's another story, right? So the Part B dollars are dollars that were given to every governor in the country to be used at the governor's discretion. In our state, that amount was $35 million. It's called the Part B dollars. Up until now, the governor has not indicated how she plans to use those dollars. And again, to be fair to the governor, she could use it, as they've done in other states, for totally non-educational purposes. Prison guard overtime pay or anything like that. It's whatever they feel is the need in their state. Of course, those of us here, some of us at least, are advocating that the government use, if not all of it, at least a good part of it for these furlough days. It's roughly about $5 million a day for the furloughs. The teacher's salary, the principals, cafeteria workers, utilities, and whatnot. $35 million would buy you 7 furlough days. But just say this, what if the governor were to say, of that $35 million, let's use $20 million and keep the $15 million for some other purpose, maybe some for the University of Hawai'i as well, but that $20 million would buy back 4 furlough days. That would get us basically through January, because although there are 5 furlough days remaining for the rest of the year and the first half of January, remember now over 100 schools have applied for exemptions to the waiver. They want to exchange those waiver days we talked about earlier for classroom days. And so not every school will have 5 furlough days classroom time. Then we will then be in session. So between now and the day session opens, let's have this dialogue that I was talking about where you bring people together. And here's my proposal, Ibrahim. I think stakeholders should get into a room, leave their self-interest and their egos out the door, put a piece of paper on the wall and say, what are we going to do for the kids? And I am confident if we were to do that, and based on that goal, we can get to somewhere to deal with the furloughs in the out years. Because remember now, even if the governor were to release Part B stimulus dollars, that only gets us not very far, right? We still have to deal with the rest of the 010 school year and then the 011 school year. So we need a longer range plan, obviously. And I think if we go into session knowing what we want to do by then, because that's quite a bit of time for us to be a bit more deliberate and thoughtful about how we want to deal with this, fast track a bill, takes roughly 5 days from the first day of session, and then get that up to the governor's desk. And it's a bill that she would sign. The governor has already indicated that if it includes a tax increase, she will veto the bill. We could override the bill, but it just gets messy. It gets political. It gets used as a wedge issue in the campaign and so on and so forth. You know, and there are some issues, I believe, in the legislative process. I don't believe healthcare is one. I'm very disappointed what's going on in the Congress. But say campaign spending reform, an issue like that. I think there can be some partisan aspects to that, what benefits this party or that party. Education, however, I think we should bend over backwards to remove as much of the politics in that issue as much as possible, because ultimately who gets caught in the crossfire of that battle are 170,000 public school students.
So it appears that he's thinking about a plan. Would you read it that way?
Yes, to say that the House is doing nothing wouldn't be correct. They are having some heated discussions within the House on how to proceed. Representative Chris Lee has, I believe, taken the lead on this, and the key is finding that plan that all parties will agree with. He, Representative Takumi, did give one scenario, and that could happen. But we just have to take one day at a time and continue these discussions. Unfortunately, the governor is in China right now, so we're dealing with her staff, but they have been available and they have shared information. And we have presented them with some options and ideas, and I've asked, with technology, make sure you're emailing the governor and keeping her informed and in the loop, because when she returns, we really want to talk with her and get her opinion on some of these ideas, because, as I said, time is of the essence. But the window is still open, and we will not give up until the very end, as I said before.
And I take it there's discussion, formal, informal, between the Senate and the House.
Yes.
As well, yeah.
Yes.
Because you mentioned like Representative Chris Lee and all that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Any discussion on?
Well, if you read today's advertiser, $35 million has already been allocated to the DOE.
That's according to whom?
According to Linda Smith, who's Linda Lingle's spokesperson now while she's in China, hustling people to come here. So it's not a decision on the part of the governor anymore. She seems to be saying it's up to the DOE how they use that money. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying what I read in the papers today.
My understanding is the governor would like to see some of those monies put towards the race to the top competition. That will be funding by the federal government, where states will be competing for grants. And my understanding, the executive branch feels that if they can put the money into areas that will help with the race to the top competition, and if we're able to receive those grants, we'll be using the money in order to secure millions of more dollars in the future. Some of us feel, though, just the fact that we have garnered this international attention on reducing the school days, and some of these nations literally think we're nuts, that we are going as low as 161. Japan, 240 school days. Korea, 220. China, 209. New Zealand, 197. Canada, 190. And here we are at 161. We should be ashamed that we have allowed this to happen. But the 35 million, or if you take out UH's cut, 25 million, is discretionary purely within the governor's office. And they may have targeted it in certain areas, but we're asking her make some adjustments and end some of these furlough days, which at this time she has not been willing to do. So it may be in the DOE, it might be earmarked, but the DOE, I don't think they have gotten a full receipt of those funds, and it is still within the control of the governor.
earmarked to the DOE but not released to them. Yeah,
I believe that's
in
the
that
process.
sense, yeah.
Yes.
But your talk about the race to the top seems to me it is race to the bottom given the
We're already
crisis.
there.
And it's like buying fish in the ocean. You know, I mean, who guarantees that we're gonna get out of 50 states, we're gonna get enough money to do what we have to do?
Right.
And how much this race to the top is gonna cost? Is it 5 million, 10 million, 1 million? I mean, how much?
Yes.
That's the thing.
Right. The irony is, you're right, that while she wants to race to the top, we're falling to the bottom. And
We're already there.
just about.
You know, what really bothers me as someone who's been teaching at the university for 37, 38 years is the fact that we're not, the people coming out of the DOE, the people the students who are graduating don't really have the kind of skills that they need to compete in the modern world, this very complex, difficult, challenging modern world. And I'm not so much concerned with I think we need to be concerned with 190 days, 160 days, the fact it's so short, but we also need to be concerned with the quality of the type of education that students are giving. And what many of us at UH have seen is that the students coming in, while they're great people and we're very fond of them and we try to do our best with them, they really aren't coming in to the university with the kind of skills they really need at this point. And something has to be done to raise the quality of education, the kind of educational delivery that DOE is doing. This is the other problem, that it's not good enough adding 17 more days or 30 more days. These need to be 17 days of really quality education, the type of education that the DOE is not providing our students at this point.
I think that's an important point, but the short-term solution is go back to where we were, or at least close to where we were, and then attend to those other things. And these would be, because this No Child Left Behind business has a lot of things that are wrong with it, because it's talks to standardized tests and so forth, so you're teaching people how to finish exams and succeed in them, rather than build those critical skills, etc., that are needed. So when you come to school, to college, like UH, then we would have an easier time with, rather than do remedial kind of work, do the work that we're supposed to be doing. So, give them more knowledge and look for discovery of knowledge with them in a way that those kinds of skills that they should have gotten in school, like high school and below that, would allow them to go for the discovery of knowledge and then become the educated individuals that they need to become in this globalizing world. I mean, that's a very important thing. And this is why I think, talking about long-term strategies are very important for solving that particular question. So, like Representative Takumi, not in this segment, but in another segment, he was talking about long-term strategies in solving the situation, the fiscal crisis in terms of education, in like maybe closing some schools that have lost students, only 50 students in it or however many, improve upon those particular kind of schools, merge schools together, etc., and really give very positive kind of education with positive outcomes for the students, so that when they come to college, they'll be able to succeed. So any comments on that?
Well, interestingly, the race to the top competition between the states is all about school reform and innovation in the schools. So the federal government wants to see and hear from those states who have ideas and who are moving forward on items that they haven't done before, or that will certainly improve student performance. But as we said, we need to start at a base in terms of the instructional days, and the 161 is not the base, and many of us feel that you can apply for these grants, but you probably won't receive them, because we're told not many states will get these grants, probably less than half of the states. And although people think that we have the attention of the Secretary of Education, since he wrote that stinging letter to us about our furloughs, I think that will hurt us much more than anything.
Yeah, that's an important.
We've become known as a kind of pariah in the educational community, as a model of what not to be.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah, but you know, I mean, we're talking about all this in the context of the larger problem, which is the fiscal and economic crisis, you know, globally, but also which started in the United States, and Hawaii has seen the effects, I mean, devastating effects of it. One of those effects are the things that we're talking about. So how, I mean, one of the ways in solving the problem long term financially is look at ways in which we could, for instance, improve on the economy of the state and so forth, so that we will get more revenue and we spend 50% of that on education, right? So we'll have that 50% would be bigger because the revenues would be much bigger, and then that would solve that particular problem. Then we could attend to the question that you raised, which is the quality, higher quality of education.
I'm just thinking that this, you know, we the parents are up in arms, probably for the first time in a long time, about the education their students are receiving, their kids are receiving. This might be a good time just to really talk about the DOE in general and the way in which public education functions in the state. I think people are really alert to that at this point. And maybe we get the extra days, and then we sort of all go back to sleep in a certain sense. And that's really dangerous, because it's no good going back to the status quo. The status quo doesn't work. You know, public education in Hawaii is broken in some very fundamental ways that need to be changed. And if this is the sort of catalyst for doing that, for making that kind of change, then I think we can really do something here, you know?
Yeah, so, Senator?
Well, let me say that we have some outstanding public schools within our state, and we have many outstanding young students who go on to higher education. But there is, yes, certainly room for improvement, and whether it's real or perceived, there is a perception that the high school student who's graduating is not as prepared as his mainland counterpart, for example, whether it's he or she is entering the job market or entering college. Yeah, you're right that this will give us an opportunity to look at education. For that matter, next session we'll be looking at all of the agencies, all the departments, and as Governor Lingle has stated already, that government in essence will reinvent itself, and what we end up with 6 months from now, a year from now, will not be what we had a year or two ago. And you know, it's unfortunate that the economic downturn was a steep drop, and the recovery is going to be a slow incline. So you know, we're not going to be able to solve this problem immediately, and unfortunately we're going to have to deal with either more cuts in services or programs in the future, or raising taxes or other revenue generating ideas, maybe selling excess lands or surplus lands if we have any out there. I'm checking now an inventory of our state lands to see if there's anything that we could possibly sell to the highest bidder.
The University of Hawai'i? The Mānoa campus it's a valuable piece of real estate.
Well, actually, you know, a piece that I've been looking at is, and I haven't talked to anybody in the university about this, but above H1 between Makakilo and Kunia, there's it's either 300 or 500 acres where the original UH West Oahu was going to be built. But because of the lack of infrastructure up there, it was moved down below H1, below Farrington, to its current position or place at near the North-South Road. But my creative idea is to, of the 500 acres, take 100 acres of it, upzone it, and sell it, and see if we can get $50 to $100 million, probably closer to $100 million. And I think it's going to be those type of creative thoughts or ideas, if not at least actually implemented, but discussed, that we're going to have to look at, because $1 billion shortfall next year is going to be very difficult to deal with. We had a tough time with the $2 billion last time. Now we're looking at we were cutting, the meat and the skin. Now the analogy is we're going to get down to the bone, and
we've been cutting bone on this campus for a long time, so we're very used to that. No, we've had no fat for a long time, except maybe the administrators and their salaries, but that's another story.
Yes, it is. But it's going to be interesting in these next 6 months at the university, in our public education, at the state capitol, and how we deal with this is going to lead us to the next year, 2 years, until 2012, 2013, when the economy really picks up. But
you're an optimist.
I am. Yes, I am.
Good.
Yeah,
I hope you're right.
Yeah, the other thing, what you said about public schools, in terms there are very good ones, and in fact, I've had students from public schools who read and write very well and so on, but in general, that is not the case. And so there is, as you mentioned, room for improvement always for that. But we shouldn't, the main thing for us is to not only salvage the public school system, but really improve upon it, it seems to me. But I'm thinking about what would all this do, what we are experiencing right now in Hawaii with education, what would all this do to the question of ethnic relations? Who's going to be on the short end of the stick more than other people? I know this is your area of expertise, John.
Well, a lot of the concern is expressed in terms of the students, without necessarily specifying who those students are, because a majority of the students are from minority groups. Just 3 groups, Filipinos, Hawaiians, Samoans, already constitute more than half of the public school students.
Right.
I think it's roughly about 2/3 are from the minority groups here in Hawaii. And those are the ones who are really being disadvantaged by the Friday furloughs. Those are the ones who are being disadvantaged even before that by the underfunding of the public school system. This is $278 million a year. I think we shouldn't necessarily blame the quality of the students. One of the basic things that a public school student doesn't have is a book to take home as their own, to do homework, or to take home on the weekend. Because books cost so much, the DOE does not have the funding to buy a book for each student. When my daughter started public school here in kindergarten, I couldn't believe the book she brought home. It didn't have a cover. I said, what happened to the cover? She said, it didn't have a cover. I had never had that experience in my life, going to public school from kindergarten to high school. But at least she had a book. But to me, the problem in the public school system is the underfunding. It's just been chronic over decades now, and that percentage has been declining. That's one of the reasons why I think the students, in terms of achievement scores, don't score high necessarily as much as certainly private school students. I wouldn't blame necessarily the quality of the teaching, the quality of the students, but what the schools are lacking and have been lacking for decades here.
Yeah, no, I agree. You have to look at the institutional problem. What is the infrastructural problem in that, and then try to recover that kind of situation. and build those infrastructures required to allow students to succeed, teachers to learn. I mean, I know a lot of dedicated teachers who spend money out of pocket.
No, but because as I said, the students are really being disadvantaged by the Friday furloughs and in the long term, the underfunding our minority students. That's why they're underrepresented in Manoa.
But this is not only an ethnic situation, it's also a class situation, because they're primarily working class students from lower classes. Because we have this real class split in terms of education here.
Sure.
The upper middle class students are all at the private schools. They've abandoned the public school system, and so what we're doing by doing this is basically reinforcing the kind of class polarization, the class split that we have, which is very dangerous in a multi-ethnic society like this.
Right.
Very dangerous.
Yeah. So that would affect the economy as a whole and society, of course, but the economy as a whole. If we want to look just not only at the economy, and that would worsen the problem with funding education as well. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to take a look at. But I mean, when a student say somewhere in I don't know, in Punahou, for instance, he's not going to be affected with what's happening here.
Of course, at least to go to school on Friday.
Yeah,
schools are still open.
You know what I mean? So here, there's a problem right there. So the ethnic component of it, the dimension, the class dimension, is very critical for us in terms of looking for a solution. I mean, to this whole thing, long term, even short term, because furlough Fridays. Yeah, right.
But from a macro sense, that student at Punahou or that family or society in general will actually be affected by these furloughs, because these students who are not in school, where are they? What are they doing? Will we see an increase in teen pregnancies? Will we see an increase in drug abuse? Will we see an increase in thefts and burglaries? Will the test scores go down, and thus our workforce is not the caliber that we want it to be? So society as a whole certainly is going to be negatively impacted. And although some students are in private schools, their neighborhoods, their communities will hurt.
Sure. Yeah. Indirectly, that is absolutely true, because I mean, society would be, at a loss with those kinds of issues. What I'm going to do is go to another segment, just under 2 minutes, Representative Takumi, and he's talking about what the governor's saying, like, she was surprised that they did it 17 days the way they did it. I mean, the people, the signatories to this, but she was a signatory to it again.
Right.
However, but it's interesting what he's saying, and then we can talk about it.
What did
Politics.
The governor was quoted in the paper saying she didn't realize the 17 days was going to happen, but there are executive memorandums that was issued by Budget and Finance back in February that the whole premise of their request to various departments on what to cut was based upon a 36-day furlough. Remember now, the governor first proposed 3 days a month for all state employees. 36 to 17 that's a nice drop as well. Still not quite there to the promised land, but I'm not quite sure what the governor means when she says, she was surprised. But look, that's good news. I'm going to assume the governor is surprised in a way that she believes that's too many days. Well then, you're one of the 4 signatories. And by the way, on the management side, the department has 1 vote, the Board of Ed has 2 votes, and the governor has 3 votes. So just do the simple arithmetic. She's in a far better position to call everybody back to the table. She was also quoted in the paper saying, and again, I'm not going to believe everything that I read in the paper, but nevertheless, she was quoted in the paper saying, why don't the department and the board and the union get together and, what about a 5% pay cut? And there is a precedent for that. The hospital system is taking a 5% pay cut instead of furloughs, because obviously Hospitals are a 24/7 operation. It's very difficult to close a hospital 2 Fridays a month. So they're going to go the pay cut route. At the university, that is a proposal that the union and the university is negotiating, and on the table was a 5% pay cut, not furloughs. So it doesn't mean that every bargaining unit has to have the same thing.
Yeah, so anyway, Representative Takumi, and we all know, I mean, the governor had suggested 36 days. Not suggested, like tried to ram it through 36 days. That was not, no dice on that one. But 17 days. So from your perspective, I mean, since you are closer to the politics of it all, if you could.
Well, negotiations can be very complicated and complex, especially when you're dealing with 4 different unions, which the governor has been doing, UPW, UPA, HDEA, and the teachers. And each side is always looking out for their best interest. Many people did criticize the agreement, but I think all those who signed, when they signed, thought it was in the best interest of everybody in the state. What I believe, some people were really disappointed when the governor came out saying that it was a big mistake, a big error, and in essence, maybe pointing fingers at people when all parties were really bargaining in good faith. Yes. So now that she has come out and said what she has said, this is a great opportunity for the governor to provide some leadership. And this is an opportunity for her to reach out to all of the parties and say, we've got a short period of time. This is the goal which we must accomplish. Let's do it.
Yeah, but she cannot do that by remote control. She has to be here.
Yes, she does have to be here, although, with a computer, she could always give some orders over the internet, right, and online. But, what has happened has happened. Let us now salvage it, and it can be salvaged, again, if we have the political will to do it. And that's where many of us now are pushing and moving as hard as we can. And let me mention some of the parent groups out there as well, because Kanu Hawaii has been a very active group. The Learning Center with Debbie Berger has been involved, Education Matters. These are some of the parents who have been in touch with us constantly. And I know they have also been speaking with all the stakeholders. So there have been many discussions going on at different levels. And I think that in the next week or 10 days, we really do need to focus that talk into a bill or two. And if we can do that, I think there's hope. But we can't just sit around and wait for another party to do it. We need to initiate and be very, very proactive.
Yeah, because it appears that the governor hasn't been taking the leadership, or reluctant to, at least. So absent that, it doesn't mean, okay, then we can go home. We have to do something. And I appreciate that spirit from you folks at the state capitol there, at the legislature. Any more? Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the problems in this issue is that she's not running for re-election. So she's not trying to solve problems. If she was really concerned about public education in Hawaii, she would have canceled that trip to China and stayed here and got together with the legislators, with the DOE, the other unions, and tried to resolve this issue. But because she's not concerned about being re-elected next year, she's not really stepping in and demonstrating that leadership, the political will that you've mentioned. I think, for example, Neil Abercrombie has been very proactive in meeting with the legislators, calling Arnie Duncan, trying to come up with some solution. because he is running for office. And he's kind of acting gubernatorial. This is what I would do if I was governor. But Linda Lingle has no political stake in the elections next year. So that's how I read what she's not doing.
Yeah.
Well, I do believe, though, she may truly feel that next year is going to be such a terrible year in terms of tax collections and the statewide budget as a whole, that she feels it's right to hold back any extra funds or new funds. But that's where there's disagreement, because we feel that education, our children, is a top priority, should be a top priority, and must take precedence over other areas and issues.
Yeah, like the ship is sinking now, not like next week or next year. We got to fix it now, and then we figure out what's going to happen next year. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, in terms of she really is on it, she would have canceled that trip. That's why I say, even like, as you mentioned, she could send an email. It's not the same, though, as, Skyping, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
Or being here, even better than Skyping. So, because, there's all this kind of discussion, like I can go to your office in the Senate and go up to her office, and so forth. So a lot of more dynamic kind of give and take would occur if someone is present. I mean, we know that, yeah. So, I mean, that's, it does not sit well with me, I mean, personally, looking at the whole thing, that she is in China and here we are trying to figure out something going on, with that. Any comments? Noel,
and just that's getting back to that larger picture, that not only are we dealing with the educational system, but we're dealing with an economic system which no longer works in Hawaii. If it really worked, this whole economic model of dependency upon tourism and the military, it's not working. It's not generating the type of decent jobs that we need. It's not generating the revenues we need to run our government in any kind of rational way. And we need to really rethink where we're going as an economic society. We need to rethink dependence on fossil fuels. We need to think about greening our whole economy, moving away from tourism as strongly as possible toward a really diversified economy. And that means investing in education. This is the irony of this whole thing. Right. At a very time when we should be really increasing our investment in lower school education, and also right here in Mānoa and the community colleges, we're cutting back in a really savage manner. And this is, I think, what bothers all of us.
Right. I wanna go to the last thing with Roy Takumi. It's under a minute. So we go to that one and then we wrap up.
The cuts in our DOE system is penny wise and pound foolish. Education is clearly an investment that pays off many more times what we put in, obviously. Looking at it from an economic point of view, because obviously somebody who's better educated will have a better paying job, less likely to be on welfare, less likely to be in the criminal justice system. We all know that. But just for that person as well, education has set the opportunity for that person to realize his or her potential. What can be a greater calling for our society to do than that?
Yeah, I think we can all agree about that, and that's the spirit of the discussion here. So I just wanted to end with that so that we can all be reminded with this. So we basically fled out of time. So thanks to our viewers, and see you next month. And thank you all for coming and sharing your Mānoa with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aloha.